It started as an ordinary flight, but what unfolded left everyone in shock. A young black girl, shy yet hopeful, boarded the plane with a dream in her eyes. But from the moment she stepped on, one flight attendant singled her out. Her snide comments and dismissive attitude weren't just unprofessional, they were personal. The girl's quiet attempts to stand her ground only seemed to make things worse. Passengers noticed but remained silent, unsure of how to intervene. What no one realized was that among them sat the airline's CEO, quietly observing everything. As tensions rose and the flight attendant's behavior grew worse, the CEO made a decision that would change everything. What happened next turned the tables in a way no one expected. This story is a powerful reminder that kindness and justice often come from the most unexpected places. Stay tuned for the moment that silenced everyone on board. As the plane took off, the young girl quietly clutched her small, worn backpack, her eyes scanning the window for a glimpse of the clouds. But her peaceful moment was interrupted when the flight attendant passed by, letting out a sharp sigh. "Do you even know how to fasten your seatbelt?" She sneered loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. A few people glanced over, but no one said anything. The girl fumbled with the buckle, her face flushing with embarrassment. The CEO, seated a few rows back, watched the interaction intently, his expression unreadable. He had been quietly observing the girl since she boarded, noticing her polite demeanor and the way she kept to herself. He also noticed the flight attendant's unnecessary hostility, which only seemed to grow. As drink service began, the tension heightened, and whispers began to spread among passengers. The CEO leaned forward, his decision forming. As the flight attendant made her way down the aisle, her tone toward the other passengers was professional, even cheerful. But when she approached the young girl again, her demeanor changed. "You're holding up the line," she said sharply as the girl struggled to unzip her bag for a bottle of water. The girl froze, apologizing softly, her voice barely above a whisper. A couple seated nearby exchanged uneasy glances, but still, no one spoke up. The CEO, now fully engaged, observed the flight attendant's double standard. Her treatment of the girl seemed deliberate, her words chosen to humiliate. Meanwhile, the girl's discomfort grew more visible, though she kept her head down, doing her best to avoid further attention. In another row, a woman whispered to her seatmate, "Why is she targeting her like that?" The tension in the cabin was palpable, and the CEO knew he couldn't stay silent for much longer. As the flight continued, the tension became harder to ignore. The flight attendant's sharp remarks toward the girl didn't let up, and every time she passed, she found a new way to belittle her. When the girl politely asked for a blanket, the attendant rolled her eyes and muttered, "This isn't a charity," before moving on without another word. The girl lowered her gaze, trying to blink back tears, her small frame shrinking further into her seat. Passengers began to whisper more openly now, their unease growing. A man a few rows away adjusted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable with what he was witnessing. The CEO, however, remained silent, his expression calm but his mind racing. He observed not just the girl but the passengers' reactions, or lack thereof. When the flight attendant returned to deliver snacks, she intentionally skipped the girl's row. That was when the CEO quietly stood up, his eyes locked on her, and started walking toward the front of the plane. All eyes followed him, the cabin holding its breath, unsure of what was about to happen. As the CEO approached the front of the plane, the flight attendant noticed him and forced a quick, polite smile, clearly unaware of who he was. "Sir, can I help you?" she asked, her voice dripping with fake professionalism. The CEO didn't respond immediately, instead glancing back at the young girl, who sat quietly, her eyes fixed on her lap. He turned back to the flight attendant, his calm demeanor making her shift uncomfortably. Before he could speak, a passenger in the middle row stood up. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice firm. "I think you've been incredibly unfair to that young lady." The flight attendant froze, her professional facade slipping for a moment. Another passenger chimed in, "Yeah, we've all noticed it." Murmurs of agreement began spreading through the cabin, and the flight attendant's face paled as the pressure mounted. But just as the atmosphere reached its breaking point, the intercom crackled. The captain's voice came on, asking the CEO, by name, to return to his seat. The passengers exchanged confused glances, realizing that the man they'd been watching wasn't just another traveler. The flight attendant's expression shifted from confusion to shock as she began to piece together who he was. The air was thick with tension, and it was clear that the next few moments would determine everything. The CEO paused for a moment, looking around the cabin before finally speaking. "Actually, I'd like to address something first," he said, his calm voice carrying a quiet authority. The flight attendant stiffened, her confident air all but gone. "I've been observing your behavior throughout this flight," he continued, his gaze unwavering. "Your treatment of that young lady has been unacceptable, unprofessional, and completely against the values we stand for." Gasps rippled through the passengers as the realization set in. This wasn't just any passenger. This was the man in charge of the entire airline. The flight attendant's face flushed, and she stammered, trying to defend herself, but the CEO held up a hand. "There's no excuse for what I've witnessed. You're representing this company, and actions like yours won't be tolerated." He then turned to the girl, who looked up at him with wide eyes. "Young lady," he said gently, "you deserve respect, just like everyone else on this plane. I'm truly sorry for what you've experienced today." The cabin erupted in applause, and for the first time, the girl smiled faintly, her confidence beginning to return. But just as the CEO was about to take his seat, he added one more thing, turning back to the flight attendant. "By the way, I'll be personally meeting with the crew after this flight to discuss changes moving forward. This isn't just about today, it's about ensuring this never happens again." The flight attendant's expression crumbled as she realized the gravity of the situation. As the passengers cheered again, the CEO sat back down, the atmosphere on the plane completely transformed. The girl, now surrounded by kindness and support, finally felt seen. As the plane descended toward its destination, the atmosphere on board felt entirely different. Passengers who had been silent before now made efforts to engage with the young girl, offering her kind words and support. She finally relaxed, her smile growing more confident with every interaction. The CEO remained seated, observing the shift with quiet satisfaction. When the plane landed, the flight attendant avoided eye contact, hurrying through her final tasks. The CEO, however, approached the young girl before disembarking. "If you ever need anything," he said warmly, handing her his business card, "don't hesitate to reach out, and keep being brave." She nodded, clutching the card tightly as a symbol of newfound hope. As he stepped off the plane, the CEO made a mental note to ensure this incident sparked change, not just for his airline, but as a reminder of the power of standing up for what's right.